Oh, there we go.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, happy Thursday. Let's go. We are blessed to have Mr. Alec Zirkenbach on the show this week. Stoked to have you on. It's been, well, we were fortunate enough to see you at Affiliate Con a couple of weeks ago. Feels like forever ago, but it was like a month. But
yeah, prior
you've been
to that, I don't think I've seen you since like 2020.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
Yeah, but you've done a ton of stuff. We've come across paths at being part of seminar staff. You've judged the games with us. You've been in charge of the adaptive games. You've been in charge of the specialty course. Now you are running the adaptive academy or training academy, right? And that's what you presented on at the at Affiliate Con, and that's what we want to discuss a little bit more. And you've owned what, 2 previous affiliates too, as well? Is that right?
Yeah, one affiliate officially. I was a founder and ran a military affiliate with Chris Russell.
That's right.
In
Okay.
Kuwait. So that was my genesis. That was my starting kickoff. Was I was in Kuwait at the time. We were at the Kuwait Naval Base, which is there's a small army camp there called Camp Patriot, which is left over from when the U.S. liberated Kuwait from Iraq. So we came through, we got Iraq out of Kuwait, and then we still have a presence there on the Kuwait Naval Base. But it's this tiny little army camp. And there was this bubble, like a big blown up bubble like gym that was still there. Just ton of rusted metal equipment. I mean, it was a good sizable gym for being a military gym that was just put up for temporary purposes, but nothing special about it whatsoever. And I happened to be stationed there. And at the time I was training CrossFit, and this was 2010. And then I saw Chris, who I didn't know was Chris Russell, but I saw him, you could very easily tell who's training CrossFit and who's doing just bodybuilding, whatever stuff.
Thrusters and like pull-ups. You're like, yeah,
gave him that side eye, like, wait, what are you doing? You're doing stuff. You're doing weird stuff like me, So we kind of started to get together, and he took me under his wing, and he literally gave me some of the lectures, like would sit me down, whiteboard, lecture, teach me more about CrossFit. And then so we had started a class. I think it was just twice a week, one time. People could come do CrossFit with him. And then he would throw me in the middle sometimes and be like, all right, you run some of this, you coach it. And I hadn't had my level 1 at the time. So I was just, I drank the juice and I was all in. I was reading every journal article when I was supposed to be on duty, doing things. And then eventually Chris was leaving. He was rotating out. So I took leave. I actually went to Switzerland for a weekend at the time, got my level 1, came back and continued to run that program there for a while. And it was great. It was really the roots of CrossFit. We didn't have any bumper plates. I don't think we had any kettlebells. It was literally, we would carry ammo cans. We would do burpees outside in the sand. We would jump on Jersey barriers, like concrete blocks for our actual blocks. And then we would take over some space in the gym from time to time. We were definitely the hated groups. They're like, here are those CrossFitters, like stealing some of the equipment and taking up with it. But it was, I wish I could go back to that simple time when it was like pure, just very simple movements. And the best part was the community, because being on deployment there, you can't go outside the base. You can't do anything. You're literally just working, and then you don't have anything else to do. So that community of doing fitness and once a day with the people getting together, that meant everything to everybody. So it was really nice. But yeah, that's where I started. I came back from that deployment, and then I was eventually medically retired from my injuries that I had before. And that's when I started Fathom CrossFit in San Diego. So that started in 2012. I founded that. Okay. And immediately started having people with disabilities, adaptive athletes coming and train. I worked with the Wounded Warrior Battalion in San Diego, developed a program with them. So they actually would bus people over as part of the Wounded Warrior Battalion. They would come over once a week for a fitness class, and we would always keep it simple. We would teach them something. So might be like, hey, we're going to learn deadlifts today. Teach them something, and then have them a good, fun workout. Make sure they felt good. It was more of a good feeling type of thing for people that were going through injuries, recovering, that kind of stuff. But that's how I learned to work with people with disabilities, was just trial and error, having different types of people literally showing up and not having any clue who's going to show up there. And that was my start into working with other adaptive athletes.
So let's take a step back just a little bit. So did you had your injury when you had started CrossFit? This was previous, or was this after?
I had just started training CrossFit at San Diego, the original CrossFit San Diego, before the deployment where I got injured. And I remember, I maybe had been training a month. So I specifically remember never like watching people doing kipping pull-ups and being like, wow, man, like I never got the technique down to do that. That's how like fresh I was. But on that deployment, I was trying to train CrossFit. I was doing, more high intensity, shorter bouts of things, of exercises. And then when I got injured, I was down. I didn't walk for almost a year. So that my genesis story into that was that I didn't walk for almost a year. I had really bad, my right leg had a really bad fracture. I got compartment syndrome, which led to my perineal nerve being damaged. So I can't control my right foot and ankle from that. So I had lots of soft tissue damage, which had lots of surgeries over time. I was a wheelchair user for about 5 months and then on crutches for about 6 months. I really didn't walk fully for almost a year.
Wow.
And it was a really tough time. I always tell this to when we do ATA seminars and whoever will listen, but I really owe my life to a CrossFit affiliate, and it really wasn't anything special. It was the affiliate I was kind of not even tricked, but I was kind of forced to go back to training, was in a racquetball court in the back of old YMCA that was converted into an MMA gym. Somebody was, running CrossFit classes. I don't even know if they're affiliated, to be honest, at the time. No great equipment. I think they had like 3 squat racks, but that's where I was going to after my injury. And it really was the supportive nature of the community that gave me a second chance at a happy and healthy life. There was nobody who knew how to work with people with disabilities, no great equipment, nothing like that. It was just people saying, hey, you did a great job today. Like, hopefully, we'll see you tomorrow. And I was like, okay, fine. I was being harder on myself because I had that pre-existing physical fitness and sporting ability, and that I didn't have after my injuries. So it's like, what we always talk about for level 1 trainers is the biggest risk is that former collegiate athlete, somebody who's had a high level of sporting excellence and then maybe is deconditioned now and still in their brain thinks that they can go 100 miles an hour, but their body is not ready for that. That's where I was, but I knew I couldn't do it. And I just was hard on myself because I was like, man, I used to be able to back squat 300 plus pounds. And now I get out of breath when I sit and stand from a chair. But that gym really did save my life. And that led me to eventually wanting to stay in the Navy. I was like convinced, my doctor was like, hey, I want to try this. I want to stay in. And that's when I went to that tour when I ended up in Kuwait and met Chris Russell. So I'm glad.
Oh, wow. What
glad
a
I did.
Of events.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it sounds like the coaches there at that first affiliate that you're going to approached you the same way that a lot of us do at our affiliates with adaptive athletes, where it's like, I'm not really sure what to do, but we're just going to do some trial and error. And like, you tell me if this doesn't, and I will tell you what my ideas are and we'll see how it goes. And then hopefully it works out for you. And then I just want to see you again tomorrow and we'll try something new tomorrow. And I know that's been the approach for myself oftentimes, but the more education and the farther along in the, the process of CrossFit we go, the better capable we can be, because there's way more education out there now. So I would like to go back, and I know at Affiliate Con, you discussed first and foremost, like, what is truly an adaptive athlete and how do we as coaches, as affiliate owners, prepare what we're getting into as trying to welcome them into the gym.
For sure. I think the way that you would approach, and I would say any really good, thoughtful trainer, especially CrossFit trainers, I think you are able to work with people with disabilities 100%. I think if you are willing to admit that you don't know everything and that you're going to work through it, you're going to ask questions, you're going to be thoughtful, and you can train just about anybody, even somebody with a disability. It just takes a little bit of time and knowledge and experience to do that. Obviously, I'm a proponent of education because we've developed courses which will help get you from, step 1 out to step 20 already, and bypass all the errors and the faults that you're going to do. So we'll give you the knowledge, the principles, so that you don't make those, you don't put somebody in an undue risk. You don't say the wrong things. You are there and you're ready and willing, and you have the tools in your tool belt to be able to coach adaptive athletes. It's the same thing with coaching other populations, whether it's kids or older athletes.
Masters,
There's
right.
some things that you need to understand about coaching them. And the education really will prepare you. But at the end of the day, you just have to be a thoughtful, caring coach and be willing to admit you don't know everything, ask questions, take feedback. And that's what's really required to do that. What is important is getting that education, though. So if you are really serious about training anybody in your affiliate, you really do need to get that education. You wouldn't just start a kids program without going and taking the kids course, right? And if you really want to be serious about coaching masters athletes, you need to understand that population. You need to go get your education. Just same way you get your level 1 and then progress to your level 2. Like, could you theoretically train people in the CrossFit methodology without taking your level 1? Yeah, you could watch YouTube videos. You could learn something, but without taking the education and diving deeper, understanding the definitions, the principles that guide CrossFit methodology, you're not going to be able to apply that methodology properly, safely, and effectively. And the same thing is for adaptive training too. You really do need to have that education.
And
So-
I'm
I
sure
think
there's a bit of a like a trial and error, right? If you don't have the education, where going back to your original story, if I'm the coach and I don't really know what I'm doing and I don't have the tools, it can be as simple as just trying something different each day, saying hello and asking, will I see you again tomorrow, and get you to come in the next day. But to get those tools in our tool belt, I mean, just the gap that could bridge, and even the confidence it can give a trainer to, for me personally, it's like, I don't have the amount of confidence I probably would want to for a lot of the different types of adaptive athletes that could walk into the gym. So I know that I certainly have some holes in my game when it comes to that. Absolutely.
I think what's kind of interesting about that is, especially for myself, knowing like the less educated I was and the newer I was as a trainer, the more defensive I was, and the more I had to present like I knew more of what was going on. And I'm sure like somebody would come in and I would have been like, oh yeah, this is exactly what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to do it. And, oddly enough, the more experience I've got, the more knowledge that I actually have, and the more I realize that I probably have no idea how to do this. And so let's just work together. Let me ask questions. Let's try something, see if you're willing to try this thing. If that doesn't sound good to you, let's go a different route. So I think that's an interesting journey, because a lot of times, the newer the coach is, the more they feel like they have to stand their ground and really prove how much knowledge they have and how prepared they are and how well they can handle the situation.
Or they just avoid.
Or just avoid it, right?
Yeah,
But
go the other direction, right? Just avoid, and then that's not doing anybody any good.
yeah. And so the reality of knowing what you don't know and going after the education, out to your point, and making sure that you're prepared. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is, you said once you got back to San Diego and started your affiliate, you started bringing in a lot of adaptive athletes. And I know Kevin has the same thing in Colorado. Like, obviously you can relate to them and they can relate to you, and that's a big part of this. Was there anything else that you were doing? Like, how do you attract that kind of clientele?
Well, I will say, first off, I think I can relate to them because I have a personal lived experience of developing a disability. But I'm not obviously disabled. So I go about my day, if I wear pants, and I am fresh and I don't have a lot of fatigue, like I don't walk differently, I don't present a lot differently. Obviously somebody like Kevin Ogar does. He has immediate credibility because he's in a wheelchair, right? Or Logan Aldridge, who's a founder of ATA, he's an above elbow amputee. Like, he doesn't have an arm. You see him and you immediately you think there's some credibility, at least, of living and being in the disability community of sorts. I don't necessarily have that credibility. So I feel in some way I've had to work harder because I don't present as disabled, obviously. And so I think it's a chip on my shoulder, because there's a lot of times when people don't think I'm disabled. They don't think I should be leading or be in the disability community because of that. But I will say, when I first started, and there wasn't any course, there wasn't anything I could take to give me that knowledge right away. I just surrounded myself with other smarter, more experienced people. So the program we had was an actual program with a medical hospital in San Diego. So they brought people over. They had a rec therapist and a physical therapist there every time. So if there was somebody that had some condition, they were working through some pain, they had something going on, I wouldn't right away say, oh, I got this, I can figure this out. I would go to the physical therapist and go, hey, this guy's claiming he has some, nerve pain. We're trying to do this movement, but it's causing him pain. What can we do to work around this pain? Or can we find some way to get him in a position where he's safe and he can still do some movement? So I think in the beginning, try to surround yourself with people that bring in that knowledge or experience. That would be great if you don't have the educational component just yet. But I think it is so important, like you were bringing up before, to admit that you don't know everything. If you go into this and you say, oh, I got this, I'm the best trainer in the world, I can train literally anybody, and then somebody comes in, there's going to be, the spectrum of people with disabilities, of adaptive athletes, is so wide. And unfortunately, even two people with the exact same condition, the same underlying health condition, you could have two people with the exact same level of spinal cord injury, and they could present completely differently. Right. So, two people with cerebral palsy are two different people. Tom Miazga, who's a Paralympic swimmer, he's on our ATA seminar staff. He's the 5-time fittest man in the world for seated with hip function division in CrossFit. He's a wheelchair user. He has cerebral palsy, but a lot of people with CP are standing, walking athletes. They may just be affected on one side of their body, where Tom is affected diplagically. So he's affected just his legs, his lower half is affected. So unfortunately, there's a wide spectrum of people that you have to work with. And that's why it's so important to have that education and to admit that you don't know everything, that you're going to work through, you'll figure things out, you'll do trial and error. It's all good, right? We do this anyway as coaches, because you may program for a week and say, you may have come up with this amazing workout where it's like, I've got this perfect rep scheme. This is what they're going to do. They're going to do drop sets. They're going to whatever, and it's going to hit this way. This is the stimulus. And then people do it and they're like, like no big deal. Or you over program, right? It's way too hard. Nobody's finishing the workout. You expected them to get 3 rounds and people are getting 1.5 rounds. It happens all the time. You just have to take that information back in, recalibrate, and then go back at it with that knowledge. Do the best you can with the knowledge you have. And then when you know more, do better. That's a Maya Angelou quote that we use all the time in ATA, because you're just going to do the best you can. And then as you learn, then you can do better. Right.
Do as best as you can today, and then tomorrow's the next day. This is for sure. This is so fascinating, because it's just such a perfect example of the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, right? Like as you start listening, the difference, you take something like cerebral palsy and just all of the different ways that one thing needs to be handled differently. And this isn't just when we're talking about disability and adaptive athletes, not just physical disabilities. Is this right, Alec?
For sure. I mean, the spectrum of when we're talking about people with disabilities, or as we call them in the CrossFit sphere, adaptive athletes, because it's a more empowering term, is so vast. It really is so vast. I mean, intellectual disabilities is a whole other spectrum, along with physical disabilities. Some people have a mixture of both, which is complex, right? And it's really tough to define adaptive athletes. It's really tough to define people with disabilities. And that's one thing we do in our education, is define adaptive athletes. When we first created the course for CrossFit, the CrossFit Specialty Course Adaptive Training in 2017, that was one of the very first things my team at the gym, we looked into. We're like trying to find a definition of adaptive athlete, trying to find it. And at that time, CrossFit calling everybody athletes was, I think, still relatively new. And most of the fitness world has taken that on too, which is great. But there really wasn't a definition of somebody who is doing fitness training who has a disability, right? It doesn't exist. And it's even more complex, where outside of the fitness sporting world, defining somebody with a disability is very complex. There really isn't one codified definition. And it really depends on what you are using it for. So like the World Health Organization has a definition of people with disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed has its own definition of people with disabilities, but health insurers are going to have a different definition. They will not have a generalized definition, but they will have specific language about, who is eligible for certain insurance and coverage and things of that nature. The legal world, when it comes to applying the ADA laws to like jobs and, architecture and things like that, there's different definitions. And most of those, like the World Health Organization or the ADA, those are very broad definitions. The definitions are very inclusive. They want to include as many people as possible because they don't want to be exclusive to that definition of an adaptive athlete. Whereas, the legal world gets a little bit more defined, but still there's lots of gray areas when it comes to that. So we created a definition for adaptive athletes, and it is sort of modeled after what CrossFit had laid out for what is fitness as well. Mm-hmm. So we use work capacity as our anchor, which a lot of other definitions do too, which is if somebody has a condition which affects their activities of daily living, ADLs, which is more of a clinical term, that's the same thing as what we would consider work capacity, right? Your ability to just complete everyday tasks, whether it's, sport or life or your job based, it's even just, being able to take care of yourself in your own home. But for us, an adaptive athlete is somebody who has a permanent impairment that causes limitations, and those limitations affect your work capacity.
Okay.
So their impairment is also considered their underlying health condition. So, for example, like that could be the spinal cord injury or cerebral palsy, but we don't know how. Just having a definition or having a diagnosis is not enough to really understand how that's going to affect their ability to complete tasks. So somebody could have a diagnosis. It doesn't mean that they're being affected, and it doesn't affect their daily abilities in any way. But typically, like using Tom Yazga as an example, he's able to walk, but not very easily. He wouldn't walk throughout his day because it would be far more taxing for him to do so. So he's a wheelchair user. So his cerebral palsy causes limitations in his ability to walk, to squat, to do a lot of things with his lower body. And that affects his work capacity. And that's how we define an adaptive athlete. It is still very broad, general term. Like it is not good enough a definition to then classify athletes and eligibility for, let's say, the CrossFit Games and the ability to compete in CrossFit. It's still a very broad, general term. And that's a whole other topic that you could talk about, is how do you define somebody who's eligible for para sports or specifically competing in CrossFit. Gets far more complex than just for trainers to understand. You can just think, does somebody have an underlying health condition that causes them to affect their ability to complete their daily tasks? Then they could be considered an adaptive athlete. But very gray area, because what if every gym has people that are injured or impaired. They've had a shoulder injury. They sprained their ankle playing soccer in some league on the side. You wouldn't immediately call somebody who sprained their ankle an adaptive athlete, because you would expect them to regain most of that function over time. But it's a gray area. At what point, what if they don't regain full function and they have limited ankle range of motion because of that injury? Are they now an adaptive athlete? And I don't think it really matters. You're not going to classify athletes when they come in the gym. You're going to work with whoever you want to work with when it comes down to it. So, but having an understanding of that is nice to understand. And it's very much a self-identification for adaptive athletes. A lot of people in the CrossFit world, if they identify as being adaptive, then great, identify as being adaptive. I'm definitely an adaptive athlete, but I don't live my life every day like broadcasting that all the time. I only need to maybe declare that when I'm going to get healthcare from the VA, or if I did want to do a competition, then I'm looking to compete with other people with similar abilities, because I don't have any way to compete against somebody who has full capacity and full ability. So
yeah, that makes sense. I think the other thing is, like, a lot of affiliates say they're inclusive, say they're open to everybody, but the reality of it, especially from your experience and what you found, is that would you say some affiliates actually aren't conducive to completely being open to all different kinds of adaptive athletes? And
Probably without even realizing it too, like not
Right.
purposeful
Yeah.
at all, but just there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that you talk about that are like, wow, I didn't even really think about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we don't have any data because we don't have full surveys. We don't know how many people with disabilities are training in our gyms, but I would venture to guess that most affiliates, while they think they're inclusive and they think they're ready to train people with disabilities and adaptive athletes, are not truly prepared to do so. CrossFit has this very empowering, innate belief that anybody can train in the affiliates, right? Like it's built in to the DNA of CrossFit, where if you ask any affiliate owner, any trainer, they're going to tell you anybody can train there, right? CrossFit is for anybody, but it's not for everybody, is also a saying. And that's a different thing. That's that, anybody can train CrossFit, but not everybody's going to do it because not everybody's willing to push hard. They're not willing to go to that psychological tolerance limiter and keep going and come back the next day when like you've done Fran. Like some people are willing to come back and do it again, and other people are like, no, I don't want to feel that way. So they're not going to train CrossFit.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but the belief that CrossFit is for anybody there's a slight fallacy in that, only because, and it's the belief that CrossFit is for anybody. It's built in because we say that the methodology is infinitely scalable, and that is very true, right? Anybody can train CrossFit theoretically, because you could have one workout of the day. You could have 20 different people in that class. You could have, collegiate athletes to untrained people to 70-year-olds to people, coming in straight first session to have trained with you for 5 years. And a great CrossFit trainer can understand the stimulus of that workout and apply scaling modification tactics so that everybody can train safely and effectively and be inclusive in that group, for sure. But that does take some time and effort to do that properly, and does take some education. And it actually takes some actionable steps for you to make sure that you are inclusive for people with disabilities. There's this paradox where what we call it is the inclusion illusion, where it's not specific to CrossFit gyms, but it is very prevalent in CrossFit affiliates, where it's your innate belief that you are inclusive, that anybody can come train in your gym. Kristen, I think you even said it, like anybody who walks in the door, we can train those people, right? Anybody who walks, we'll add roles in the door for being more inclusive. Anybody who comes in the gym, we could train. It's that belief plus that having some experience and some success training some variants of people. So if a gym or a trainer has trained, I've trained some college level athletes, I've trained some masters athletes, I've trained some soccer moms, I've trained a variance of people, I've had some success, like, yes, we can train everybody. Well, that inclusive belief that you're already inclusive because the methodology is infinitely scalable, plus having some success, that may lead to not taking actionable steps to make sure that you are truly acceptable and inclusive for people with disabilities. And it's that you may not, go after higher education and get knowledge and experience through your education. You may not have taken a double check on your facility to make sure you are accessible for people with disabilities in your space. And some people will say, well, our bathrooms are ADA compliant, our entrance is ADA compliant. That is the bare minimum for acceptance for people with disability. But it may be that the way you store your equipment, you have stretchy bands lit up on the wall above the medicine balls, which only people who are in standing can get to that, right? Or the way that you stack your weights, or the way you lay out your gym, or that your flooring has edges to it that are high and are trip hazards, or a wheelchair wouldn't be able to get up and down easily. There's lots of things that you may not be thinking about in your physical space, let alone your digital space, and making sure people can interact and get to your space, get to your gym easily. But it's also one of the main reasons some gyms may not have adaptive athletes training in your gym is that you don't have adaptive athletes training in your gym already. And it sounds really dumb to say, but if you don't have people in your community representing that minority group, then it's not going to signal to that group that you are a safe place for them to come train, right? So I think most gyms, kind of like a bar, will take on a personality and identity, right? So if the owners have kids and they may more athletes that come there may tend to have kids. Maybe they have a kid zone. They have childcare potentially. They have classes that are built for people that have kids. It just tends to go that way. Or if you have an owner who's in, their low 20s, maybe they tend to gravitate and have more people of that age group. It just kind of happens that way. If you don't have any people with disabilities, adaptive athletes in your gym, then that's immediately it's a signal that you may not be a place for those people. And it sounds weird, but starting with 1 or 2 people and actively recruiting them, getting them in your gym will have a snowball effect for other adaptive athletes coming to your gym. They will see those people training there and they will know that that's a place for them. And then being active on your social media to showing those people having success in your gym and doing it in an appropriate way, not doing it in some disability porn way, right? There's a fine line there, but celebrating them just like you would celebrate anybody else having success in your gym is a great way to signal that you are a place for adaptive athletes. But if you're not taking these actionable steps to do these, and you're just thinking you're inclusive, then you're really not truly inclusive. You are a part of that paradox, this inclusion illusion, where you think you're inclusive, but you're not taking any actual steps, so that you're really not inclusive.
Yeah, just simply saying we're inclusive, we're for everybody doesn't make
what makes our gym different?
right?
The coaching and the community. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, well, if everybody says that, then that means nothing. But so let's go back to that. I would love to hear some actionable steps. So obviously you made mention of the education, and you guys offer a course that can be done online. That's a great place to start. Now, as far as the facility is concerned, what checklist would you have, like as an affiliate owner, when I go back to my gym after this call, what can I do walking through the gym to look and maybe with a notebook and be like, all right, is this inclusive? Is this what I need? Or do I need to kind of rearrange some things, or do I need to reevaluate how we have things laid out? What is there
for sure.
step or a list I could use?
Definitely. I think step 1 is to ensure that you're ADA compliant. That's the bare minimum. And that has a lot to do with the structure of the building and the entryway to your facility. Obviously, people think immediately about restrooms, but that is so important, because if somebody has a disability and they're going to come train your gym, they're going to need to use the restroom, and they're going to need to have the space in there to be able to use it. So you need to have a 5-foot radius inside your restroom. That includes in a stall as well. And that's there. So if somebody's using some type of mobility device like a walker or a wheelchair, that they can get off their wheelchair and onto the toilet or do whatever they're going to do in the stall. So that's important. You got to have grab bars around the toilet. The grab bars are there because if you think about it, if you're transferring from a wheelchair to the toilet, you're going to use the grab bars to stabilize yourself if you're not able to use your lower extremities or you need some assistance. If there's not grab bars there, what they're going to end up doing is putting their hands on the toilet seat to transfer, which you just think about that. You're not going to want to come back to a place that doesn't have that. The other thing that we see a lot of times in affiliates, because maybe they're in a warehouse or some mixed industrial space, is that the sink may have a cabinet underneath the sink.
Okay.
That sink needs to have a clear space underneath the sink. So if a wheelchair user came up to the sink, they can adequately get up to the sink to wash their hands. But a lot of times we see like in your house, you may have a cabinet underneath the sink and it's like built into it. That's preventing somebody from getting up close to the sink to be able to, otherwise they're going to be far too far away from using that sink. One of the other things, and I'll get back into the other space kind of checklist, but just specifically on restrooms and doors in general, doors should have a handle. They should not have a knob. Knobs are difficult for people to grab. If they have grip disabilities, it's gonna be tough for them to grab a knob and turn that knob. So all doors should have a handle that they can easily go up and down. So check if your restroom door, sometimes that's an overlooked feature. It's left over from a previous thing. Somebody hasn't installed that. And then also make sure that your entry door doesn't have too much force required to open and close it. So I can't give you a specific pounds of force, but it shouldn't be difficult to where you're trying to open it and you have to like put force and stabilize yourself to open that door. Otherwise, there should be some type of mechanical assistance to that door, because that is a barrier, literal barrier to entry for people with disabilities as well. In the space itself, do a check, go walk around, affiliate owners and trainers, go walk around your gym and really look at the floor. So a lot of gyms obviously have rubber flooring, but they may have like the horse stall mats that are kind of all thrown together. Are there big gaps, like good inch deep lips onto that horse stall mats everywhere? I'm not saying you have to get a new threshold to go around that, but you can buy rubber thresholds that go just on the edging of that, just to make sure there's a lip to get up and down. Otherwise, it's just a trip hazard in general. But take a look at your flooring in general, go around and imagine if you were in a wheelchair or you had a mobility device and you're walking, even if you're prosthetic and you're walking around, are there holes in your floor, indentations? Are there gaps in your rubber flooring that could cause a trip hazard or a wheelchair wheel to get stuck on that? That's something you could take a look around and you can make some small adjustments. It probably wouldn't cost too much to make those changes as you do it. The next thing I would say is your equipment storage. Look at how you store your equipment, like your medicine balls, your dumbbells, your kettlebells, your weight plates. Weight plates specifically, if you only have weight trees, like if you have a stanchion and you only stack weights vertically on a weight tree, that is really challenging for people with, think about an upper extremity athlete that only has one point of contact. Trying to get a weight off of a tall weight tree is really challenging, or somebody in a wheelchair to get to the bottom of that weight tree to pick things off. So just have an alternate means of storage. I'm not saying you can have some good storage that attach to the side of the rig, so you can do slide on and slide off, or you could have some record style storage where things just like a record player, records like stacked, like a bookshelf kind of style. So add some variance to your weight plate storage if you only have those weight trees. And then look at how.
I think that's, sorry to interrupt, Alec, but I think that's an important distinction to make, that you're not saying go around and completely revamp and change how you have everything, but just adding some additional options. Is that correct? Yeah.
For sure. And it'll go a long way. I think the things you make changes for potentially serving adaptive athletes will serve your community at large anyway. There are going to be people that have difficulty getting a plate off the bottom of that weight tree anyway, whether it's because of their mobility, whatever it may be. It's going to serve your community anyway. You may find, oh, we like this better, you know. I know specifically for those weight trees, sometimes people just have, you could just have a PVC stick, and if you take that stick out, then it makes it easier to pick the plates up off. That's easy way to fix it too. And it's a great point, Kristen, to say, I'm not telling you to go change your entire gym, redo your entire website, or just for the potential for serving people with disabilities. But you can make small changes that signal that you're ready and signal to your entire community that you're thinking about them and making it easier for it. So we understand that affiliates, aren't all making bank. They don't, have endless funds to make these changes that could be expensive. Even equipment storage is expensive when you have to do it, and you have limited space to do it as well. But think about, are your medicine balls stored up high on a shelf that is, you can only get to them in a standing form? Even your shorter athletes may have difficulty getting to them, right? So, and think about storing plates too, especially if they're where they're stored, or equipment in general, by weight. Typically we put the heaviest weight on the bottom and the lightest weight on the top. That's just tends to be how it goes. But think about maybe instead of doing that where it's lightest on top, medium, and then heaviest on the bottom, to potentially doing a variance of lightest, moderate weight, and then heaviest weight, kind of spread vertically, so that people at different heights can just get them anyway, right? That would help everybody, but also adaptive athletes be able to access the equipment as you're going around. So that's what I would look in your gym and just think about that. Could I make some small changes here and there? And then for a standard, let's say Globo gym, the ADA requirements are that there's 36 inches or 3 feet around a space to get around all of your equipment. That's just enough space for somebody with mobility issues to walk, or a wheelchair to get through. What you can do is just go in your gym and grab a stretchy band. Most of those stretchy bands, if you just hold them with your fists kind of at the ends, that'll end up being about 3 feet. And if you just walk around your gym, and if you like run into things, you need to arrange stuff a little bit differently. And what I'm not talking about is if you store all of your rowers up against a wall, or you put all of your bikes kind of smashed together in one area, but you expect to pull those out to use them, that's perfectly fine. But what I'm saying is, if you have some equipment that is staying in a space where your rig is here, maybe you have a cable machine, maybe you have something like a reverse hyper, make sure there's a good 3 foot gap for people to get around and in between those things, right? That's important.
That makes all of that stuff makes so much sense. And even just to reevaluate, like you said, like where weights are and lightest to heaviest, and being like, yeah, this probably doesn't make sense. Probably some of the strongest people are some of our tallest ones. Why not put the heaviest balls on the top of the racks as opposed to the opposite? We've got a question here from James, and he asks, what is the best approach for a coach when an adaptive athlete drops into a class unexpectedly, not giving the coach time to pre-plan or prep? I know I've got an answer for that. Is one, we always want to, at least in the back of our mind and in our prep time, go through like, what if this one-off scenario happens? At least have an idea. But beyond that, Alec, what would you say?
Yeah, this is the time for humility and going up to that person. And if you don't have experience, let's say you're just coaching and they're visiting and you have no experience with them, you've got to go up to them and say, hey, like, let's work through it. Do you have any experience? You can ask them, what would you do? Like, looking at the workout today, do you have any experience with this? What would you do? Because maybe you're going to already try to apply something to somebody and they have some knowledge or experience. But if not, then you just have to try to figure out the best way you can to train them safely and effectively. And it's difficult too, right? We're also trying to be inclusive in our classes, which is a challenge. We're trying to always balance the safety of our trainers or trainees, the inclusiveness of them in that class setting, and the effectiveness of that workout, really hitting the stimulus. Sometimes you do have to reduce the inclusiveness. So let's say we're doing a back squat. Let's say theoretically in this class, we're doing a 5x5 back squat, and you have somebody with spinal cord injury roll into your gym, right? They're not going to be standing and squatting. So they're going to be doing something with their upper body. In your warm-up, you're warming up your class for squatting. So they're going through some type of warm-up activation. They're going through the ranges of motion of that squat. So they're warming up their legs, their hips, their ankles. You're doing all kinds of stuff like that. Well, that seated athlete is not going to be squatting. So all that warm-up you're doing for your standing athletes is not going to be effective to them whatsoever. They need their own warm-up in a way. And so while you can still keep them a part of the overall group and inclusiveness, they do need their own warm-ups as well. So just think through, they have to do their specific warm-up, because their workout is not going to be a 5x5 back squat. It's going to be something like a heavy pull or a heavy push or a press, whatever you're going to decide for that day. So I think it's challenging if you just get a drop in to do that. But again, ask questions, try to understand. Really, when it comes down to it, adaptive training we try to simplify it and try to make it too complex. But all you're trying to do is you want to understand how that adaptive athlete, how do they accomplish their daily tasks, their major movement patterns, right? So that seated athlete with a spinal cord injury, if you look at just the squat, they're not going to squat using their legs and hips. They are going to squat every single day. They're going to go through that functional movement pattern, but it's going to be their upper extremities that does that. They're going to use their arms and their shoulders to raise and lower their body mass, which is the task associated with the squat. So if you understand that, you're like, okay, we're going to do something. Instead of squatting, we're going to try to raise and lower your body. The one-to-one correlate there would be like a dip. So that would be exactly the same as a dip. But maybe for that heavy day, it's supposed to be super heavy. We don't want to load the dip super heavy for that athlete. Maybe they're doing a heavy bench press or a heavy pull. they're still training their upper extremities, and they're still kind of training that movement pattern of sorts and getting better at that movement pattern, which will make them better for ADLs and their work capacity. But it's that thought process. And that's what we teach in our course too, is how to think about movements so that you can adapt them. It's a mental framework for adapting movements, going off of your base movement that you have and understanding that stimulus first in the class. But coaching adaptive athletics, it's understanding how do they move, how do they do their squats, how do they pick things up off the ground in everyday life, right? How do they get across space? Now, what are their limitations that are affecting them? Well, they definitely have difficulty moving their body mass up and down, but we can get better at that. We can do a lot more stability, dip supports, ring supports. We can get them doing walking across boxes, like a parallel walk, but across boxes. We can make them better. And we just have to be creative in trying to figure out how to make them better at life in general, based on what their limitations are from their underlying health condition. That's the simplicity of it. Without being too complex, it's just understanding how they currently move. Let's get them better and reduce those limitations, be creative in how we do that.
So interesting. I love how you say that's the simplicity of it, because my mind is just going in a million different directions right now.
Yeah, and I saw the list from your slide of like, just like you said, all right, so what is a squat? I'm going from, I'm getting down and getting up, right? So what does that look like for this athlete? They're going to have to get down and get up some way, regardless of what their limitation is. Can we replicate that in the gym? A deadlift, we're pulling something off the ground. More than likely, this athlete is going to have to pick something up to some degree, right? So can we replicate that? I liked also, it talked about like the monostructural stuff. It's essentially covering ground. Can you give me an example? Like what are some of the things you do in that like to recreate or to adapt monostructural rowing, biking, ski or jump rope, running, any of that kind of stuff?
For sure. If you're looking, it depends on what the stimulus is. And this is, it makes the more that you're a thoughtful coach and you're really thinking about why am I applying this stimulus to everybody in my class, then you can be a better coach for adaptive athletes. Because if you don't truly understand why you're doing something in a class, like why are you doing today, why are you doing 1,000-meter row versus doing a 5,000-meter row, right? Or why are you doing Tabata rowing versus a 5,000-meter row? Like, yes, you're still rowing, but there's a completely different stimulus applied to that athlete for both of those scenarios. When it comes to monostructural movements, you have to understand the underlying why you're doing it, what you're trying to get from that training. So it very much matters. If you just use a wheelchair user as an example, because that's the easiest one. So if you're doing a 400-meter run in a workout, the easiest correlate would be like, oh, you're just going to have that athlete go outside and do a 400-meter push in a wheelchair. But there's lots of safety issues and efficacy issues involved in that. Your gym may not be flat, or the outside world may not be flat outside your gym. There may be curbs. You may be running through a parking lot. You may be going over, there's screws and glass and rocks, all of it. So it may not be safe for them to push.
And all sorts
it could be slanted. The parking lot could be slanted, which is really difficult. The gym that I had in San Diego was sort of on a hill. So we were on a flat side. The other part was flat, but then there was a hill up and the other side a hill down. So for somebody to push in a wheelchair, flat, great. Going uphill, far more difficult. Flat, again. Coming downhill, they don't even have to do any work. They're literally just leaning back and braking in their wheelchair. So running to pushing in a wheelchair is definitely not equal whatsoever. There's probably a better way to apply a monostructural conditioning stimulus to a wheelchair user in a workout, using something like a ski erg or doing arms only air bike that you might have available, rather than pushing in that chair. But if your stimulus is making sure that they can get across space, so the difference here would be, do you want to know that they can literally push themselves across a distance safely and do it while you're doing some other things, kettlebell swings and pull-ups, something like Helen, right? Do you want to know that they can get themselves across space and do these other tasks under stress? Or do you just want a monostructural cardiovascular challenge Well, if you're after that monostructural cardiovascular challenge, there's far safer and more effective ways to test that athlete, to apply that stimulus, than it is to maybe push outside. But then again, we get this example all the time for Murph, right?
Mhm.
We do our charity workout Murph, which is mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, mile run. That is very much the stimulus of that you want involved is community, right? People are doing that together in a community. 3, 2, 1, go. Everybody in your gym is out the door for a mile run, right? That is a day where your adaptive athletes may want to do some version of that with everybody. Maybe they're not doing a full mile outside, but maybe that's the day where your wheelchair users are ensuring that they can travel a full mile outside, right? And get across space. Because the stimulus is a little bit different. That's not a normal training day. That is a community-based workout where everybody is suffering together and you're around each other, you're doing something together. So the why you're doing it is really important to understanding how you're going to apply adaptations to it.
So what I'm taking away, and I think this helps to answer Vicente's question, is like, if we're just looking at conditioning, hey, let's do it in a safe way, let's do it in an effective way. That's when we put them on a ski erg or a bike. There are going to be days where you actually want them to replicate what they're doing in life. Just like he says here, how's that different from their everyday life of pushing on sidewalks, hills, rocks, all that kind of stuff? So there will be a time and a place and a day and a workout that has the stimulus where you're like, you are going to go outside. Maybe you don't go 400 meters or whatever it is. Maybe you don't do the uphill or whatever, but you are going to do that on occasion. It just doesn't have to be the case every single time. Is that essentially where you're going with that?
For sure. I mean, it's just not worth the risk every time, potentially, in this case, for a wheelchair user to go outside and push. I mean, think about it right now. We're recording this in December. Super cold outside. It may not be the best. There might be snow on the ground. It's not going to be safe for a wheelchair user potentially to go outside and push. And we're also missing some of the point where pushing in the wheelchair may not elicit the same cardiovascular response as you want from your other standing running athletes. So like if you use the workout Helen as an example, the run is definitely challenging. The run is fatiguing. It's not the hardest part of the workout, but
Speak
it's
for
where
yourself, Alec.
Okay. I would agree too. The run is definitely the hardest part for me too. For most people,
absolutely the worst part of that workout for me.
Yeah.
For most people, the run is where you're spending most of your time. It's where you are challenged. You are exerting some energy. You're breathing heavy. It's your cardiovascular challenge. And you're coming in and you're doing your weightlifting challenge and your pull-ups right away and going back into it. But if a wheelchair user is going outside and pushing in the wheelchair, they may not get that same response from your intended stimulus. So it really just depends on where you are, your training. If you had a perfect flat ground that was safe for a wheelchair user to push outside, then I would probably use that more often. But most gyms do not have that setup. And we're just a huge advocate at ATA for using ski erg for wheelchair users. It is a wheelchair user can learn and get good, and they can ski and keep almost the same pace as a standing user. And that will for sure get your cardiovascular challenge than potentially not getting it outside using your wheelchair. So ski ergs are great for the other thing too about wheelchair users, they're pushing all day in their wheelchair, right? They are pushing everywhere. So do we want to have them push more in a more intense setting in their training? It may not be necessary. Definitely we should do it sometimes. They should definitely do some sprints. They should definitely do some longer pushes, dedicated pushes in their wheelchair, but they are pushing all day. We don't necessarily need to replicate that in the gym. And it's not the same correlate to standing athletes, right? We walk all day, people walk all day, and then you run. That's a little bit different than pushing in your wheelchair, which takes a lot more effort. So,
and it seems in addition to the physical, the change up of the physical challenge, just mentally, so much more fun to get on the ski erg or the rower, do something different than what you're doing all day, every day.
Yeah.
So that would probably help keep the workouts a little bit more just
the way to keep it inclusive and to make them feel like, right. So if you are doing Helen and you have athletes running outside your gym and coming back in, then if you have the ski erg and you can move it around the gym, bring it to somewhere where the athletes are leaving and coming back into the gym by the front door. Or if it's nice outside,
Right outside,
take it
yeah.
outside so that the athlete can go outside. They do their skier. They still get the experience of going outside with everybody and coming back in. You know, let's not put them in the corner in the back of the gym where they're not near anybody else and they're doing their skier by themselves like that. If you want to have that community feel, that's not the way to do it.
Yeah. And, you know, that's something that we can do anytime we have an athlete using a machine instead of running. You know, if it's nice out, pull the machines outside so that everybody goes outside. That I think that can be applied to a lot of
It's the same thing
scenarios.
you would do for somebody who has a knee injury. The same thing,
exactly.
you know, somebody sprains their ankle playing soccer. We want them in the gym still training. Great. You can apply these same principles and methods to these athletes too. They don't have to be true adaptive athletes, right? If they're going to be biking on the C2 machine or doing assault biking, then bring that bike near the front door. Everybody's outside running. Have them do that with your adaptive athlete. Now everybody's included and they still feel part of the community. They're still getting the same replicated stimulus as much as you can. And it's safe and it's effective. It's hitting the stimulus that you wanted.
Yeah, and we've got a couple more questions here that kind of all relate to each other, but this popped up, especially when you were talking about like doing the dips for the squats. As a coach, how do you program to avoid overuse in certain joints? It's like clearly if all they have access to is using their arms, there's going to be a lot of bench press. There's going to be a lot of dips. There's going to be a lot of pull-ups. So I think that, and then she talks about, follow up. Is there a manual out there that are given numbers for volume? And that is also in line with Allie's question here of like resources. And I know you guys have a ton of education and resources. So I think this is probably a good place to plug all of that stuff and point us in that direction.
For sure. I will say great questions, very thoughtful, great questions, because that is the number one concern we have in teaching trainers to work with adaptive athletes is to try to be thoughtful to not have overuse injuries. Overuse, overtraining occurs with anybody, right? Doing too much, whether it's in one session or too much over repetitive sessions of a similar movement pattern, similar loading schemes. In this case, it's very dangerous for adaptive athletes. If you think about somebody who has one arm, like Logan Aldridge, he's above elbow. He's only using his one right arm to do most of his work or to attach to most of his equipment. If we were to blow him out in one singular workout and apply too much stimulus, right, then he's going to be less able in his daily life. It may take him, he's maybe not able to do his job. He's not able to drive a car. For a spinal cord injury or a wheelchair user, if you blow out their arms and shoulders, then they're not going to be able to transfer in and out of their chair, to drive, to do things in everyday life. The way that you avoid doing that is having a training plan, first off. And it is possible, and this is the danger that comes into effect, is if your adaptive athletes are training in your everyday classes and you're always adapting the able-bodied workout to an adaptive athlete, then that able-bodied workout really isn't taking that adaptive athlete's abilities and limitations into effect. Meaning, just for when I programmed, I tended to have a theme of the day, right? Like Monday may be like a squat focused day, right? We're doing other things, but it's mainly squat focused. Maybe Tuesday is a more of an upper body push or pull or press day. And then Wednesday may be back to kind of lower body focus. Maybe we're doing more hip extension, deadlift, clean, something of that nature. But you can see like the focus kind of shifts from upper body to lower body. It kind of shifts from maybe this plane of motion to another plane of motion. But for an adaptive athlete, if you're adapting that workout, right? Monday was a squat day. What is that going to be for a wheelchair user? It's going to be arms and shoulders. If Tuesday is a press pull push day, that's upper extremities again. Wednesday is a deadlift day. How are they going to deadlift and pick things up? Well, they're going to use their arms and shoulders. So you can see, you're like, oh crap. Like if you adapt in isolation in one day, it may be great for that one workout, but you have to think about the workouts that they did before, the movements, and the days after what they're going to do. So just have awareness that if your adaptive athletes are working out in your group classes, they may need to take a better approach to adapting and thinking it more thoroughly throughout the week. What you can do as a staff, if you have these athletes, is try to think that through and say, hey, look, we are aware that you're going to be using your upper extremities more often. So we have to be a little bit more creative in how we're going to program for you, because we don't want to do the same things. It's really easy for wheelchair users to do like curl and press, pick something up from their lap, press it overhead. Like you can do, this can be an adaptation for just about everything. But it can get very repetitive. So awareness is key to this, just understanding and being aware, and then being more thoughtful. So people that have adaptive athletes working in their group classes, and they will tend to program a slightly separate program for them, or best is to educate your athlete. The best thing you can do is empower and educate that adaptive athlete themselves and say, okay, when you see squat on the board, here are your 3 go-to things if we're focusing on strength. Here are 3 go-to movements if we're focusing on moving weight in a Metcon setting. So empower them and teach them what they can do so that they can be a self-advocate in their own classes. That also makes it so that they don't have to go to, let's say Todd is the adaptive trainer in your gym. They don't have to go to only Todd's classes, right? Because that athlete may want to go at 5:30 a.m. and you're only coaching at 5:30 p.m. Now that's not very inclusive for them. So the more that you can educate your adaptive athlete and empower them and teach them, most good CrossFit affiliates are going to have some type of onboarding foundational course. The same thing you would do for your adaptive athletes. For that wheelchair user, you're going to teach them, okay, when you see squat, these are the movements that you can do. Right? Here's some variations that you can do so that they can be empowered to make them choices themselves. So understand that adapting programming can cause problems if you're adapting from able-bodied programming. And the biggest thing is empower your athletes. Teach them so they can be their own self-advocate.
And I think this goes back to James' question earlier around what do I do if somebody shows up and I'm unprepared? Well, to your point, like, especially if it's a drop-in, if somebody's dropping into my gym and they're an adaptive athlete, there's a good chance this isn't their first ever time. And they just like are on vacation. They're like, hey, I'm going to go try CrossFit. They've probably done it somewhere else. And so when they come in the door, you're going to be like, all right, have you done this before? They'll say yes. And more than likely, they've been empowered to know what they do. And so you made that mention of the question earlier of, hey, what would you do for this workout? More than likely, they probably have a game plan based on what the workout is, if they've done this before. From my experience, it's like if somebody's going to try this for the very first time, they're not just going to show up. There's going to be a phone call. There's going to be some conversations. There's going to be a one-on-one sit down before any of this stuff happens, before they end up in class. So another thing to circle back to there. Well, this has been great. So educational. Always love learning more and hearing more about this stuff. We don't want to take all your time. Where can people go to find your resources, to get more educated on this so that we're actually truly more inclusive and offering the ability for anybody and everybody to come into our affiliates and actually train with us?
Yeah, for sure. So Adaptive Training Academy has a full education course. It's Adaptive Inclusive Trainer. It's available either online, so you can take it anytime you want online. I will say we did our best effort to make sure it's not some boring online course. Every section has a short 1-2 minute lecture, lots of clickable things, lots of video examples. So it's not some boring online course. You can also take that in a 2-day seminar format. So that's still left over. That seminar format still left over from when we started with CrossFit in 2017. We offer those a couple times a year. You can find that course online at ata.fit. That's where the courses are. There's more education there. Follow us we're really active on Instagram at Adaptive Training. So we like to post as many video examples, how-tos, and it's just a great way to see what other adaptive athletes are doing. And I will say, as a trainer, just start following as many adaptive athletes as you can. Have your feed be people with disabilities training. So obviously follow Kevin Ogar, follow Logan Aldridge, Tom Miazga, Mike Egan, who's another trainer on our seminar staff. He's an above knee bilateral amputee Marine, just to see the different variants and ways people train, different attachments they use, the ways they go about it. I mean, it's just it's great. It's inspirational to see people doing things in a different way that you could never expect, but follow as many adaptive athletes as possible. I think once you start following some, your algorithm will probably recommend some more. But if you follow Adaptive Training, that's a great start. You'll probably start to get some more. We'll post as many as possible, our knowledge, and show people off, share our knowledge there. But that's a great way to start. I highly recommend taking the course. Obviously I'm biased and I think everybody should take that course, but it's going to make you a better trainer in general. I think the biggest takeaway is it'll help you understand the why you're doing something. So if you're a programmer or if you're just interpreting your programming from your gym, it'll really help you understand. We dig into the stimulus, which I know that the level 1, we get into a little bit, but we really go deep into why you're doing something so that you can apply that to everybody. It'll make you a better coach for everyone, for your adaptive athletes, for people that are just injured, you want to keep them in your gym, and for anybody else in your gym. It'll make you a better coach.
That's awesome.
Love it.
Hey, and a ton of CEUs too. 20 CEUs
Oh, yes.
for the online
I mean, I
course,
should say that.
34 CEUs for
34
the
CEUs
in-person.
because we give, the seminar is 14 for in-person for 2 days, but we also give you the full online course and make you go through that. So you get 34 CEUs for the seminar course. I mean, if you're trying to get your level 3 and you're trying to get up to your, is it still 50 CEUs
I think the level 3 dropped down, but the level 4 is 50.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get almost all of them right there. And I will say, anybody who wants to gain some more experience, because you may be interested in the knowledge, we want to work with people with disabilities. I think we all do. We'd all love to be a gym that can support adaptive athletes. Great. Go to AT80 Outfit, sign up for our newsletter, because we'll routinely put out ways that you can volunteer. So we do lots of events throughout the year we have a training camp with Wounded Warrior Project. We do lots of events with the VA. We do some other just side events with different organizations where we put on adaptive experiences. And if we're in your area, you can come and get hands-on, help us. That's another way to get some CEUs for going through that experience. So follow our newsletter so we can stay in touch, and we'll put those out, those opportunities as well.
This is so great. Thank you so much, Alec.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
For sure.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Great, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Hope to have you back before long.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for checking out this episode of the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. Now, if you're a coach who wants to coach more effectively, impact your members, and advance your career, then the Knowledge Pro is the next step. Inside, you'll get hundreds of coaching videos, weekly calls with level 4 coaches, and direct feedback on your coaching. From homework reviews to full class breakdowns, we do it all. This is the best way to grow as a coach and take your skills to the next level. Now you can join the Knowledge Pro at besthouroftheirday.com/the-knowledge. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Now keep coaching, keep improving, and we'll see you next time.